Army hero returns after 2 years to surprise her, but what he finds in bed leaves him breathless. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. Today, I want to start with a beautiful prayer for my beloved family. May you all be blessed with happiness, love, and endless success. May every challenge in your life turn into an opportunity, and may your hearts always be filled with peace. But before we begin, I have a big alert for all of you. Some fraudulent people are creating channels with my name, stealing my videos, and uploading them as their own. This is deeply upsetting because it is affecting my reach and making it harder for me to connect with you all. I have told you 100 times, please subscribe to this channel and share my videos so we can grow stronger together. But sadly, I am not getting enough support from you, and honestly, it hurts me. After all the love I pour into my stories, I need your love in return. But no matter what, I still love you all endlessly. You are my beautiful family, and nothing will change that. Now let's begin with love. The Charleston summer air hung heavy with jasmine as Sophia Charlotte stepped out of Reynolds and Associates, her father's prestigious law firm. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the historic cobblestone streets, painting the antebellum buildings in hues of amber and gold. At 26, she'd already accomplished what many attorneys spent decades pursuing, making junior partner at one of South Carolina's most respected firms. Yet today, like every day for the past 3 months, her mind wandered far from legal briefs and court appearances. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the centuries-old stones as she made her way down Queen Street. Her tailored navy suit a stark contrast to the casual tourists ambling past with their cameras and guidebooks. Sophia's mind drifted to the morning's heated exchange with her father, Judge Marcus Reynolds, his words still ringing in her ears. The Reynolds family has upheld the law in Charleston for 5 generations. We have a legacy to protect. Legacy. The word felt like a cage, golden and gleaming, but a cage nonetheless. Her fingers unconsciously traced the delicate gold chain around her neck, her grandmother's, the only piece of family jewelry she still wore. The rest remained locked away in her father's study, awaiting the day she would come to her senses and accept Franklin Dubois' marriage proposal. The thought of Franklin, with his perfectly pressed suits and carefully calculated career moves, made her quicken her pace toward River's Edge, the small coffee shop that had become her sanctuary. Here, among the mismatched vintage furniture and the scent of freshly ground coffee beans, she could breathe. Here, she could be simply Sophia, not the heir apparent to the Reynolds legal dynasty. The bell above the door chimed softly as she pushed it open. The rush of air-conditioned comfort, a welcome relief from the oppressive humidity outside. Agnes, the elderly owner, looked up from behind the counter with her usual warm smile, already reaching for Sophia's regular order, a lavender latte with an extra shot of espresso. "Rough day at court, sugar," Agnes called out, her voice carrying the gentle lilt of generations of Charleston women. Sophia managed a small smile, making her way to her usual corner table. "Nothing I can't handle, Miss Agnes. Just another day of—" The bell chimed again, and Sophia's world shifted on its axis. He stood in the doorway, his military bearing impossible to miss even in civilian clothes. Captain Jeremy Whipple's presence commanded attention without demanding it, his quiet confidence filling the space in a way that made her heart stutter. Their eyes met across the room, brown meeting blue, and 3 months of careful avoidance crumbled like sand castles against the tide. Jeremy's white t-shirt stretched across broad shoulders that spoke of countless hours of training, his jeans and boots casual but immaculate. The afternoon sun, streaming through the windows, caught the silver chain of his dog tags, barely visible at his collar. A fresh scar, still pink and new, traced a line along his forearm, evidence of his recent deployment to Afghanistan. Time seemed to suspend as they stared at each other, the busy coffee shop fading into background noise. Sophia felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. She'd first met Jeremy 6 months ago during a JAG cause investigation where she'd been appointed civilian counsel. Their professional interactions had been strictly by the book, but the electricity between them had been undeniable. "Your latte, dear." Agnes's voice broke through the spell, setting the steaming cup on Sophia's table. The elderly woman's knowing look darted between them, a slight smile playing at her lips. Jeremy moved then, his steps measured as he approached the counter. His voice, deep and touched with a hint of Virginia aristocracy, carried clearly, "Black coffee, please." "For here." Sophia's fingers tightened around her cup, her legal training warring with her heart. She knew she should leave. Her father's firm represented half the old money families in Charleston, and news traveled fast in their circles. Being seen with Captain Whipple would spark exactly the kind of gossip she'd been trying to avoid. But when Jeremy turned, coffee in hand, and took a step toward her table, she didn't stop him. She couldn't. "Counselor," he said softly, standing at parade rest beside her table, "may I join you?" The formality in his tone was betrayed by the warmth in his eyes, by the way his fingers gripped his coffee cup just a fraction too tightly. Sophia gestured to the empty chair across from her, her throat suddenly dry despite the latte before her. "Captain," she managed, proud of how steady her voice remained, "please." He sat with fluid grace, his movements economical and precise. Up close, she could see the faint shadows under his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw that spoke of sleepless nights. The scar on his arm was newer than she'd first thought, still healing. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly, no accusation in his tone, just simple statement of fact. Sophia took a sip of her latte, buying time. "I've been busy with cases." 3 months is a long time to be busy, Sophia. The way he said her name, soft and reverent, made her heart ache. "Jeremy." She started, then faltered. How could she explain the weight of generations of expectations? How could she tell him about the weekly dinners where her father paraded eligible young men from acceptable families before her? How could she make him understand that in Charleston's old society, some lines weren't meant to be crossed? "I know about the Dubois proposal," he continued, his voice dropping lower. "News travels fast on base." Of course it did. Franklin's father was one of the military's biggest contractors. The marriage would have been as much a merger as a union, connecting two of Charleston's most influential families. "I haven't accepted," she whispered, surprising herself with the admission. Jeremy's hand moved across the table, not quite touching hers, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Why not?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Sophia looked up, meeting his gaze fully for the first time since he'd sat down. In his eyes, she saw the same battle she'd been fighting. Duty versus desire, tradition versus truth. "Because every time Franklin talks about our future, all I can think about is that day in your office at the JAG Corps, when you showed me the photographs from your last deployment and told me about building schools in those remote villages. The way your eyes lit up when you talked about making a difference." She paused, gathering courage. "Because every time he touches my hand, I remember how it felt when you helped me with those case files, and our fingers brushed, and the whole world seemed to stop spinning for a moment." Jeremy's breath caught audibly. Outside, the afternoon had deepened into evening, the cafe's vintage lamps casting a warm glow over them. Agnes had mysteriously disappeared into the back room, leaving them in relative privacy. "I ship out again in 3 weeks, Jeremy said, his voice rough with emotion. "Special operations. I can't tell you where." Sophia felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Is that supposed to make this easier? Knowing you're leaving?" "No." He reached across the table then, his fingers finally touching hers. The contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. It's supposed to make you understand why I can't walk away without telling you the truth, without fighting for this. What truth? She whispered, though her heart already knew the answer. That from the moment you walked into my office, arguing precedents and challenging my every decision, I knew you were it for me. That watching you avoid me for 3 months has been the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than any mission, any deployment. His thumb traced patterns on her palm, sending shivers down her spine. That I don't care about Charleston society or military politics or anything else. I love you, Sophia Charlotte Reynolds. I love your brilliant mind and your fierce heart and the way you fight for what's right. The tears spilled over then, tracking silently down her cheeks. My father will never accept this. Your career, times are changing, Jeremy interrupted gently. Slowly, yes, but they're changing. And even if they weren't, he squeezed her hand. Some things are worth fighting for. Sophia looked at their joined hands. His pale fingers intertwined with her darker ones, both equally strong, equally certain. In that moment, she made her choice. Yes, she said simply. They are. The smile that broke across Jeremy's face was like sunrise after the longest night, brilliant and full of promise. Outside, Charleston continued its centuries-old dance of tradition and propriety. Inside River's Edge, witnessed only by Agnes's knowing smile and the gathering dusk, two hearts decided that love was worth any battle that lay ahead. Legacy, Sophia realized, wasn't just about maintaining tradition. Sometimes legacy meant being brave enough to forge a new path, to write a new story. And as Jeremy's fingers tightened around hers, she knew their story was just beginning. Chapter 2. Battle Lines. The mahogany-lined study of the Reynolds mansion had witnessed 5 generations of family decisions, its walls absorbing countless arguments and reconciliations. Tonight, it would witness perhaps its most significant battle yet. Sophia stood before her father's imposing desk, her spine straight as steel, hands clasped behind her back to hide their trembling. The evening sun filtered through leaded glass windows, casting prison bar shadows across the Persian rug. Judge Marcus Reynolds sat in his leather chair, his silver-streaked hair and sharp features reflecting the distinguished ancestry that had made the Reynolds name synonymous with Charleston law. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and centuries of tradition. "Daddy," Sophia began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "His service to this country should matter more than outdated prejudices." She took a step forward, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. "Captain Whipple has earned the Silver Star. He's dedicated his life to protecting everything we hold dear." Her father's fingers drummed once on his desk, the gold signet ring catching the light. "A decorated soldier he may be, but you're a Reynolds, Sophia Charlotte. Do you understand what that means? The responsibilities that come with our name?" The family portraits lining the walls seemed to watch with disapproving eyes. Judges, lawyers, politicians, all of them pillars of Charleston society, all of them following the carefully prescribed path that had been laid out for generations. "I understand that our family has always stood for justice," Sophia countered, moving to stand directly before the desk. "You taught me that, Daddy. You taught me that the law protects everyone equally, that merit matters more than circumstance." Judge Reynolds rose slowly, his impressive height making the room feel smaller. "Don't throw my own words back at me, young lady. This isn't about justice. This is about reality. Do you think the other partners at the firm will accept this? Do you think our clients will?" "Times are changing," Sophia insisted, echoing Jeremy's words from the coffee shop. "The world is different now. Not in Charleston, it isn't. Not where it matters." Her father moved to the window, gazing out at the manicured gardens where Sophia had played as a child. Franklin Dubois called me today. He's worried about you. Sophia felt her temper flare. Franklin has no right. He has every right, her father cut in sharply. That boy has been courting you properly for months. His family has been connected to ours since before the war between the states. He can give you a future that makes sense. A future that makes sense. Sophia's laugh held no humor. Daddy, Franklin doesn't even know me. He knows the idea of me, the perfect society wife who'll host his dinner parties and smile prettily at his corporate events. He's never once asked what I want. And what do you want? Judge Reynolds turned, his expression softening slightly. To throw away everything we've built? To become gossip fodder for every social circle in the South? To watch your military man deploy again and again, leaving you alone to face the consequences of your choices? The words struck home, but Sophia lifted her chin. I want to be happy, Daddy. I want to love someone who sees me for who I am, not what family I come from. Jeremy challenges me, respects me, treats me as an equal. Equal, her father's voice rose. Girl, have you lost your mind? Do you think the world will treat you as equals? Do you think his family will welcome you with open arms? Across town, in a different study with different demons, Jeremy Whipple was fighting his own battle. Admiral James Whipple, retired, sat rigid in his wheelchair, his military bearing undiminished by age or injury. The study of the Whipple family home was smaller than the Reynolds, but no less imposing, decorated with shadow boxes displaying medals and photographs of military achievements spanning 3 generations. Son, the Admiral's voice carried the weight of command despite its quietness. The military is still adjusting to integration. A mixed marriage could affect your career trajectory. Everything you've worked for, your Special Forces command, your future in the service, it could all disappear. Jeremy stood at parade rest, a habit he couldn't break in his father's presence. With all due respect, sir, my service record speaks for itself. My capabilities as an officer won't change because of who I love. Won't they? Admiral Whipple wheeled himself to the shelf where Jeremy's own medals were displayed. You think the brass doesn't talk? You think they don't consider everything when making promotions? Hell, son, half the senior staff still belongs to country clubs that wouldn't let Miss Reynolds through the front door. Then they're wrong. Jeremy's voice held an edge of steel. And if standing up for what's right costs me a star or two, so be it. Wrong? The Admiral slammed his hand down on his armrest. You want to talk about wrong? Wrong is throwing away a career that could make a real difference. Wrong is letting emotion cloud your judgment. Wrong is forgetting everything I taught you about duty and sacrifice. Jeremy moved to the window, looking out at the setting sun. The same sun, he thought, that was shining on Sophia right now. You taught me about honor too, sir, about standing up for what you believe in, no matter the cost. This isn't about honor. His father's voice grew quieter, more dangerous. This is about you being willing to throw away your future for some girl. Jeremy turned sharply. She's not some girl, sir. She's brilliant, top of her class at Yale Law, making junior partner at 26. She understands duty and sacrifice better than most officers I know. And her father? Judge Reynolds? The Admiral's laugh was bitter. You think that old-blood Carolina aristocrat is going to welcome a Whipple into his family? We may have served with distinction, son, but we're still new money to their kind. Add in everything else. He shook his head. You're fighting a war you can't win. Maybe, Jeremy acknowledged, moving to kneel beside his father's wheelchair. But you taught me something else too, sir. You taught me that the hardest fights are usually the ones most worth fighting. The Admiral studied his son's face, seeing the same determination that had earned Jeremy his Special Forces beret, his combat decorations, his command. You really love her, don't you? Yes, sir, I do. Back in the Reynolds study, the confrontation had reached its breaking point. "I forbid it," Judge Reynolds declared, his voice ringing with finality. "I forbid this relationship, this foolishness. You are a Reynolds, and you will act like one." Sophia felt something break inside her, not her resolve, but the last threads of her need for approval. "I'm sorry, Daddy, but you don't have that power anymore. I'm not just a Reynolds, I'm me, Sophia Charlotte, a lawyer who believes in justice, a woman who believes in love, and someone who's tired of living by rules that should have died out generations ago." She moved to the door, then paused, her hand on the ornate brass handle. "Jeremy ships out in 3 weeks. Before he goes, I'm going to marry him. It would mean everything to have your blessing, but we'll do it without it if we have to. If you do this," her father's voice was deadly quiet, "you'll lose everything. Your position at the firm, your trust fund, your place in this family." Sophia turned back one last time, tears streaming down her face. "No, Daddy. If you make me choose, you'll lose me, and that's so much worse." The door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot through the study. Judge Marcus Reynolds sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 63 years. On his desk, a framed photograph showed a younger version of himself, teaching a small Sophia how to ride her first bicycle, both of them laughing in the sunshine. As the sun set over Charleston, two families grappled with change, with love, with the weight of tradition and the cost of breaking it. In her apartment, Sophia's phone buzzed with a message from Jeremy. "Whatever comes, we face it together." She replied with shaking fingers, "Together. Always." The battle lines had been drawn. The war for their future had begun. But as the stars emerged over the historic city, two hearts beat in defiant unison, knowing that love, real, profound, unstoppable love, was worth any price they might have to pay. Chapter 3. Secret Vows. The base chapel stood silhouetted against the dawn sky, its white clapboard siding glowing pink in the early morning light. Sophia sat in her car, fingers tracing the delicate pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's, her something old, her something borrowed, her connection to a family that wouldn't be present to witness this moment. The simple white dress laying across her back seat caught the light, its modest elegance a far cry from the elaborate wedding her father had always imagined for her. Colonel Maria Henderson, Jeremy's commanding officer's wife, tapped gently on the car window. Her warm smile and steady presence had been unexpected gifts in the whirlwind of the past 2 weeks. She opened the door, reaching for Sophia's trembling hands. "Come on, sweetheart," Maria whispered, helping her from the car. "Let's get you ready to marry your soldier." The chapel's small side room had been transformed into an impromptu bridal suite. Maria had brought flowers, simple white roses and baby's breath, and arranged them in a small bouquet. The morning light streamed through stained glass, casting rainbow shadows across the wooden floor. "I never imagined my wedding day would be like this," Sophia admitted, as Maria helped her with the dress. "Secret, hidden, almost shameful." Maria's hands stilled on the zipper. "There is nothing shameful about love, Sophia. Nothing shameful about choosing happiness over convention." She turned Sophia to face the small mirror. "Look at yourself. You're radiant." The dress was simple but elegant, a sheath of ivory silk that flowed like water, its clean lines emphasizing Sophia's natural grace. Her dark skin glowed against the fabric, and her grandmother's pearls gleamed at her ears. Maria had helped her arrange her hair in a crown of braids intertwined with tiny white flowers. "Something old," Maria said, touching the pearl earrings. "Something new," she gestured to the dress. "Something borrowed," she fastened a delicate silver bracelet around Sophia's wrist. "And something blue." From her pocket she drew a small blue handkerchief, embroidered with military insignia. "It was my grandmother's, given to her by my grandfather before he shipped out to Korea. She said it brought him home safe." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. "Maria, I can't." "You can and you will," Maria insisted, tucking the handkerchief into Sophia's bodice near her heart. Love doesn't recognize rank or race or family trees. It just is. And what you and Jeremy have, that's the real thing. A soft knock at the door announced Colonel Henderson's arrival. The tall, distinguished officer stood in his dress uniform, his expression gentle. "Ladies, it's time. And Sophia, there's someone here to see you." Sophia's heart leapt. Could her father have changed his mind? But when the door opened wider, it was Agnes from the coffee shop who stepped through, her eyes bright with tears. "You didn't think I'd miss this, did you, sugar?" Agnes moved forward to embrace her. "After watching you two fall in love over my lattes, I brought you something too." She held out a small box. Inside lay a vintage cameo brooch, ivory against deep blue. "My mother wore this at her wedding. She married my father against her family's wishes too. They were together 53 years. Sophia's tears fell freely now as Agnes pinned the brooch to her bouquet. The elderly woman cupped her face gently. "Love wins, child. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but in the end, love always wins." In the chapel proper, Jeremy stood at attention before the altar, his dress blues immaculate, every medal and ribbon telling its own story of service and sacrifice. Colonel Henderson stood beside him as best man, while the base chaplain arranged his papers quietly. The morning light through the stained glass windows painted the small space in jewel tones, creating an intimate atmosphere despite the chapel's emptiness. Jeremy's hands, steady in combat, trembled slightly as he waited. When the chapel doors opened and Sophia appeared on Colonel Henderson's arm, Jeremy's breath caught in his throat. She was a vision in white, moving toward him with grace and determination, her eyes never leaving his. In that moment, he knew with absolute certainty that every risk, every sacrifice, every battle ahead would be worth it. The ceremony itself was brief but profound. The chaplain, an older man who had seen love triumph over prejudice before, spoke of commitment, of faith, of the courage it takes to choose love in a world that often fears it. "The rings you exchange," he intoned, "are circles without end, symbolizing a love that knows no boundaries, no limitations, no prejudice. They are made of gold that has been tested by fire, just as your love has been tested by the world's judgment and emerged stronger." Jeremy's voice was husky with emotion as he slipped the simple gold band onto Sophia's finger. "I, Jeremy Alexander Whipple, take you, Sophia Charlotte Reynolds, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you without reservation, to support you in your goals and dreams, to laugh with you and cry with you, to grow with you in mind and spirit, to always be open and honest with you, and to cherish you for as long as we both shall live." Sophia's hands trembled as she placed Jeremy's ring on his finger, but her voice was clear and strong. "I, Sophia Charlotte Reynolds, take you, Jeremy Alexander Whipple, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you without condition, to support you through every deployment and return, to be your partner and equal in all things, to face whatever challenges come our way together, and to cherish you for as long as we both shall live." The chaplain's words seemed to fill the small chapel. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder. Their first kiss as husband and wife was gentle, reverent, full of promise. Maria and Colonel Henderson applauded softly, while Agnes dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The morning light had strengthened, filling the chapel with golden radiance as they signed the marriage certificate. Colonel Henderson and Maria served as official witnesses, their signatures steady and sure beneath the newlyweds. "Captain and Mrs. Whipple," the colonel said formally, then broke into a warm smile. "Though I suspect professionally, you'll remain Ms. Reynolds." Sophia nodded, her hand tight in Jeremy's. At least until we're ready to face the storm. Speaking of storms, Jeremy said softly, we should tell them about Australia. The small group sobered. The classified mission that would take Jeremy halfway around the world loomed over their joy like a shadow. 2 years of separation stretched ahead of them, starting in less than a week. We'll face that tomorrow, Maria said firmly. Today is for celebration. I've arranged a small breakfast at our house. Nothing fancy, but at least you'll have a proper wedding meal. As they prepared to leave the chapel, Agnes pressed a key into Sophia's hand. The coffee shop's yours tonight after closing. I've arranged a little something. Every bride deserves a first dance with her husband. Later that evening, in the softly lit coffee shop where their love story began, Jeremy and Sophia swayed together to music only they could hear. The vintage furniture had been pushed back, creating a small dance floor. Agnes had scattered rose petals and lit candles, transforming the familiar space into something magical. No regrets? Jeremy murmured against Sophia's hair. She lifted her face to his, her eyes shining with love and certainty. Not one. You. Only that I have to leave you so soon. He pulled her closer, breathing in her scent, committing every detail of this moment to memory. But I'll come back to you, I swear it. I'll be here, she promised, fighting our battles on this front while you fight yours over there. They danced until midnight, witnessed only by the stars through the coffee shop windows and Agnes's knowing smile as she locked up and slipped away. Their wedding night was spent in Jeremy's small base apartment, love and passion tempered by the knowledge that their time together was precious and brief. As they lay tangled in sheets that smelled of passion and promises, Sophia traced the scar on Jeremy's arm that had caught her attention in the coffee shop so recently. Promise me something? Anything, he whispered into the darkness. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how hard it gets, we'll remember this night. Remember that love brought us here, against all odds, against everyone's expectations. Promise me we'll hold on to that. Jeremy kissed her then, pouring all his love, all his commitment, all his dreams for their future into that one gesture. I promise. Together or apart, near or far, you're my home now, Sophia Charlotte Whipple Reynolds. Nothing will ever change that. Outside their window, Charleston slept, unaware that within its historic bounds, a love story for the ages had just begun its next chapter. The stars wheeled overhead, silent witnesses to vows spoken in secret, but sealed in truth, in courage, and in a love strong enough to bridge any distance, weather any storm, and defy any expectation. Chapter 4. Dawn's Goodbye. The mission brief came at midnight, shattering the peaceful cocoon of their newlywed bliss. Jeremy's phone buzzed against the nightstand, its harsh vibration cutting through the soft sound of their breathing. Sophia stirred in her sleep, unconsciously tightening her grip around his waist as he reached for the device. Captain Whipple. His voice was instantly alert, professional, though his free hand continued to trace gentle patterns on his wife's shoulder. The conversation was brief, mostly one-sided, but its impact would echo through their lives for years to come. Yes, sir. Understood, sir. I'll be there in 30. He ended the call, allowing himself one moment of weakness as he pressed his face into Sophia's hair, breathing in the jasmine scent of her shampoo. That's it, isn't it? Sophia's voice was clear without a trace of sleep. She'd been awake from the first buzz, recognizing the particular tone of a military summons. They're calling you in. Jeremy pulled back enough to see her face in the moonlight, streaming through their bedroom window. 4 days of marriage had done nothing to dim the wonder he felt every time he looked at her. Emergency briefing. Top secret deployment to Australia. 2 years minimum. Sophia sat up, the sheet falling away to reveal the silk nightgown she'd worn for their wedding night. Her grandmother's pearls still gleamed at her throat. She hadn't taken them off since the ceremony. When? Wheels up at 0600. His voice cracked slightly. Just under 5 hours. The reality of military life, which they'd known was coming but hadn't expected so soon, crashed over them like a wave. Sophia's hands trembled as she helped him pack, each item carefully chosen and folded: his combat uniforms, extra boots, the specialized gear he couldn't talk about, photos of their secret wedding that would have to be hidden away. "The mission is classified," Jeremy explained as he checked his weapons. "Communication will be limited." Sophia nodded, her lawyer's mind already categorizing what that meant. No regular calls, no video chats, no knowing where he was or what dangers he faced. "Country first," she whispered, the words tasting like ashes in her mouth. Jeremy set down the rifle he'd been cleaning and crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her into his arms. "Hey," he tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You're my country now too. You're my home, my heart, my everything." "But you have to go," she said, not asking, knowing. "I have to go," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "This mission, it's important. Lives depend on it." Sophia straightened her spine, summoning the strength that had made her a formidable attorney at 26. "Then we'll make these last few hours count." She moved to their small kitchen, brewing coffee the way Agnes had taught her. The familiar ritual grounded her as Jeremy finished his preparations. When he joined her, still in his t-shirt and sweatpants, but with military precision restored to his bearing, she handed him his cup. "Tell me what you can," she said softly. "What you're allowed to share." Jeremy sipped his coffee, choosing his words carefully. "Australia? Deep cover operation? International weapons cartel with potential terrorist connections? That's all I can say about the mission itself." He reached across the counter, taking her hand. "But I can tell you this. Every morning, no matter where I am, I'll watch the sunrise and think of you. Every night, I'll look for the Southern Cross and remember this moment." Sophia's tears fell silently as she memorized every detail of his face. The tiny scar above his left eyebrow from a training accident, the laugh lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled at her, the strong line of his jaw that she loved to trace with her fingers. "I'll take cases," she said suddenly. "Important ones. Pro bono work for veterans' families, civil rights suits, anything that makes a difference, make you proud." "I'm already proud," he whispered, pulling her into his lap. "So damn proud to call you my wife." They spent the next hour in quiet conversation, sharing coffee and memories and promises. Jeremy told her stories about his first deployment, the funny moments that balanced out the scary ones. Sophia talked about her plans to expand the firm's pro bono program, using her position as junior partner to effect change from within. At 0400, Jeremy stood to change into his uniform. Sophia helped him with each piece, her fingers lingering on buttons and seams, memorizing the feel of him. When he was fully dressed, medals gleaming in the pre-dawn light, he looked every inch the decorated Special Forces captain. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box, worn velvet suggesting age and history. Inside lay a compass, old but beautifully maintained, its brass case engraved with intricate designs. "It was my grandfather's," Jeremy explained, placing it in her palm. "He carried it through World War II, said it always led him home to my grandmother. The magnetic needle might not point to me, but the heart always knows the way home." Sophia clutched the compass to her chest, fresh tears spilling. "I can't contact you, can I? Even if something happens with our families." Jeremy's jaw tightened. "The mission requires complete radio silence except for essential communications. Colonel Henderson will be my only direct contact, but Maria knows how to reach me in a true emergency." He cupped her face in his hands. "And, Sophia, if it comes to it, if the pressure gets too much, I'll understand if you need to tell people about us. Don't let yourself be alone. She shook her head fiercely. Number no, we decided. It's safer for your mission if no one knows. I can handle my father, handle the gossip. Just, her voice broke. Just come back to me. The sound of a car pulling up outside broke the moment. Colonel Henderson, right on time. Jeremy shouldered his bags, then turned back to his wife of 4 days. I love you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Every sunrise, every sunset, every moment in between, I love you. Sophia rose on tiptoes, kissing him with all the passion and fear and love in her heart. Come back to me, soldier. That's an order. His smile, though sad, held all the confidence that had first drawn her to him. Yes, ma'am. At the door, he paused one last time. Country first, he said softly. Country first, she echoed, managing a watery smile. Go save the world, Captain Whipple. I'll be here when you're done. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that seemed to echo through their small apartment. Sophia moved to the window, watching as he got into the waiting car. Just before he ducked inside, he looked up, their eyes meeting one last time. Then he was gone, leaving Sophia alone with her compass, her memories, and 2 years of silence stretching ahead. She didn't move from the window until the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere she knew Jeremy would be watching the same sunrise, thinking of her. She touched the compass in her pocket, then her grandmother's pearls, drawing strength from both. The day ahead would bring challenges, explaining Jeremy's absence at the firm, deflecting Franklin's continued attention, maintaining the facade of normalcy while her heart flew across oceans. But for now, in these quiet moments of dawn, Sophia allowed herself to feel everything, the love, the fear, the pride, the pain. Country first, she whispered to the rising sun, but love always. In her hand, the compass needle swung steadily south, pointing toward Australia and the man who carried her heart with him into whatever dangers awaited. Sophia squared her shoulders, dried her tears, and began to prepare for her own mission, keeping their love alive through 2 years of silence, secrecy, and separation. The sun climbed higher, promising another sweltering Charleston day, but in a small apartment that still held traces of coffee and cologne, a newly made military wife faced the dawn with determination, love, and a compass that pointed the way home. Chapter 5. Silent Months. Messages came sporadically, each one shorter than the last. Sophia kept them all in a special folder on her encrypted phone, reading them late at night when the silence in her apartment grew too heavy to bear. Jeremy's words, carefully neutral to pass military screening, carried hidden meanings that only she could understand. Weather's fine down under, thinking of coffee shops. That was the first one, arriving 3 weeks after his departure. Sophia had cried in her office, understanding his reference to River's Edge, where their love story began. The Charleston summer blazed on, humidity wrapping the city in a thick blanket that made breathing feel like swimming. Sophia threw herself into her work at Reynolds and Associates, taking on more cases than any other junior partner. Her father watched from his corner office, concern warring with pride on his distinguished face. "You're burning yourself out, sugar," Agnes said one morning, sliding an extra shot of espresso into Sophia's usual lavender latte. The elderly woman's eyes held knowing sympathy. He wouldn't want that. Sophia managed a small smile, touching the compass that never left her pocket. "I'm fine, Agnes, just busy with cases." But she wasn't fine. The silence between messages grew longer, the words more sparse. "Mission progressing. Stay safe." That was all she got in month 2, the brief text appearing at 3 a.m. and sending her heart racing. Franklin Dubois increased his pursuit, encouraged by Judge Reynolds' obvious approval. He appeared at her office with lunch invitations, sent expensive flowers that she donated to the hospital, arranged to be seated next to her at charity galas. "You can't mourn your mystery man forever," her father said during one of their weekly dinners, watching her push food around her plate. "Franklin's a good match. He'll give you the life you deserve." Sophia set down her fork, meeting her father's gaze. "I'm not mourning anyone, Daddy. I'm focused on my career. The Thompson case goes to trial next week, and after that, I'm taking on pro bono work for veterans' families." Judge Reynolds frowned. "Pro bono? Sophia, you're a junior partner now. Your time is too valuable." "My time is mine to give," she interrupted firmly, "and veterans' families deserve the best legal representation we can offer." She didn't tell him that each case felt like a connection to Jeremy, a way to serve the military community that had become her secret family. Maria Henderson helped her identify families in need, creating a network of support that stretched across the base. The third month brought a string of victories in court. Sophia's reputation grew, the brilliant young lawyer with a heart of gold and a spine of steel. Her closing arguments became legendary among the Charleston legal circle, her passion for justice drawing admiration even from opposing counsel. But the nights were hardest. She'd lie awake in their bed, still able to smell traces of Jeremy's cologne on his pillow. The compass sat on his nightstand, its needle pointing steadily south, a constant reminder of the distance between them. Package delivered successfully, missing home. Month 4's message was accompanied by a news article about a weapons bust in Sydney. Sophia read between the lines, pride and fear warring in her heart. The autumn charity season hit Charleston like a whirlwind, forcing Sophia to navigate countless social events alone. She wore her grandmother's pearls to every function, a quiet act of rebellion against the diamond tennis bracelets and designer gowns that surrounded her. "You look stunning tonight," Franklin murmured, appearing at her elbow during the annual Charleston Law Society gala. "Dance with me?" Sophia's refusal was interrupted by her father's meaningful look from across the room. With a sigh, she accepted Franklin's hand, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. "I've been patient," Franklin said, his hand settling possessively on her waist. "Given you time to get over whatever or whoever was troubling you. But patience has limits, Sophia." She stiffened in his arms. "I wasn't aware I was under any obligation to meet your timeline, Franklin. Our families have expectations," he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Your father and mine have been discussing merger possibilities. Reynolds, Dubois and Associates has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Sophia stepped back, breaking his hold. "My personal life is not a merger negotiation, Franklin, and my father doesn't speak for me in matters of the heart." She left him standing on the dance floor, ignoring the whispers that followed her hasty exit. In the ladies' room, she clutched Jeremy's compass, fighting back tears. Month 5 brought radio silence. Sophia checked her phone obsessively, jumping at every notification. Maria assured her that no news was good news, but the worry ate at her, affecting her sleep, her appetite, her concentration. "Take this." Agnes pressed a small package into her hands one morning. Inside, she found a leather-bound journal. "Write to him. Everything you can't say out loud, everything you wish he knew. It helps." The journal became her lifeline. Each night, Sophia filled pages with her thoughts, her fears, her love. She wrote about her cases, about Charleston society's attempts to push her toward Franklin, about the way the coffee shop's morning light still reminded her of their first real conversation. Target acquired, proceeding with caution. Month 6's message was the shortest yet, but it sent chills down her spine. She knew enough about military operations to understand the implications. That night, unable to sleep, she opened her journal. "My dearest Jeremy, the seasons are changing in Charleston, but my heart remains constant. Today, I won the Thompson case. A veteran's widow will keep her home because you inspired me to take on these fights. I wore your compass to court, letting it remind me that true north isn't always where others think it should be. Franklin's pressure increases daily. Daddy thinks he's wearing me down, but he doesn't understand that my heart is literally half a world away. I miss you in ways I never knew it was possible to miss someone. I miss your laugh, your touch, the way you always knew exactly what I was thinking. Maria says you'd be proud of the work I'm doing with veterans' families. I hope so. Every case feels like a way to honor your service, to support the community that you've dedicated your life to protecting. Agnes keeps me supplied with lavender lattes and knowing smiles. She's the only one besides Maria who knows our secret, and her quiet support means more than I can express. The compass needle points south, steady and true, just like my love for you. Sometimes when the silence gets too heavy, I imagine you watching the same stars, thinking of me as I think of you. The Southern Cross has become my nightly companion. I researched its position, knowing you'd see it clearer than I can. Stay safe, my love. Complete your mission. Protect our country. But remember that you have a home to return to, a heart that beats in time with yours across all these miles. Forever yours, Sophia. The next morning brought another society breakfast, another round of pointed looks and loaded comments about her unfortunate single status. Sophia weathered it all with grace, the compass in her pocket and her wedding ring on a chain beneath her clothes, giving her strength. She took on more pro bono cases, earning both praise and concern from her colleagues. The veterans' families she helped became a surrogate support system, their gratitude and understanding helping to fill the void of her secret marriage. "You've changed," her father observed during their next dinner. "There's a purpose to you now, beyond the firm, beyond tradition." Sophia sipped her wine, thinking of Jeremy's words. Sometimes change is exactly what tradition needs. "I've grown, Daddy," she said finally, "learned what matters most to me. Isn't that what you always wanted?" Judge Reynolds studied her thoughtfully. "You know Franklin's family has offered to name you managing partner if I agree to marry him." Sophia set down her glass. "My career isn't for sale, Daddy. Neither is my heart." The 7th month dawned with no message. Sophia woke each morning reaching for her phone, went to sleep each night praying for word. The compass remained her constant companion, its steady needle, a reminder that some things remained true despite distance and silence. Her journal entries grew longer, more desperate. "My love, the silence grows heavier each day. I understand the mission demands it, but my heart aches for even a word from you. Today in court, I could have sworn I heard your laugh. I turned, half expecting to see you in your dress blues, watching from the gallery like you used to during the JAG Corps cases. Charleston society circles are buzzing with rumors about my dedication to career over personal life. If they only knew that every case I take, every victory I win, is a love letter to you. Each pro bono client represents another thread connecting me to your world, helping me understand the sacrifice and service that define your life. Franklin hosted another dinner party tonight. Your compass grew warm in my pocket when he tried to hold my hand, as if it knew I needed reminding of where my heart truly lies. I made my excuses early, coming home to write to you instead. The pearls and compass have become my armor, protecting me from the expectations and pressures that surround me. They remind me that real love doesn't demand conformity. It celebrates individuality, supports growth, encourages dreams. Come back to me, Jeremy. The world feels off balance without you in it. All my love, Sophia. As autumn deepened into winter, Charleston's social season reached its peak. Sophia navigated each event with practiced grace, deflecting matchmaking attempts and focusing on building professional connections instead. Her pro bono program expanded, earning recognition from the State Bar Association, but in the quiet moments, in the space between heartbeats, she remained a wife in waiting, her love spanning continents and silence, her faith as steady as the compass that pointed the way home. Chapter 6. Breaking Point. After 18 months, the silence became deafening. Sophia sat in her office at Reynolds and Associates, staring at her phone's blank screen. The last message from Jeremy had come 6 weeks ago, the longest gap yet. 3 words: mission complicated, stay strong. The autumn rain tapped against her office window, matching the rhythm of her restless fingers on the desk. A stack of case files sat untouched before her, the top one bearing the Dubois corporate logo. Franklin's latest attempt to draw her into his orbit, a high-profile corporate case that any junior partner would kill for. "Miss Reynolds," her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Dubois is here to see you. He says it's urgent." Sophia closed her eyes, one hand automatically reaching for the compass in her desk drawer. "Send him in, Claire." Franklin entered like he owned the place, his designer suit and carefully styled hair a sharp contrast to the casual Friday atmosphere of the office. He carried a bouquet of roses that probably cost more than most people's weekly salary. Working late again. His smile held just the right amount of concern. "You're going to burn yourself out, darling." "I'm not your darling, Franklin." Sophia didn't bother to look up from her computer. "What do you want?" He set the roses on her desk, deliberately positioning them so she couldn't ignore them. "Dinner. Tonight. The new French place on King Street. Your father's already approved." Something inside Sophia snapped. The weight of 18 months of secrecy, of loneliness, of navigating Charleston society's expectations while her heart ached for a man she couldn't even acknowledge, finally became too much. "My father's approval." She stood slowly, her voice dangerously quiet. "Tell me, Franklin, at what point in the past century did women stop needing men's permission to make their own choices?" Franklin's smile faltered. "Now, Sophia, you know that's not what I meant, but your father and mine have plans." She picked up the roses, their cloying perfume making her head spin. "Merger dreams, dynasty aspirations." With deliberate care, she dropped the flowers into her wastepaper basket. "I am not a corporate asset to be acquired, Franklin." "This tantrum is beneath you." Franklin's voice held an edge now. "You've had your little rebellion, focusing on pro bono work, playing at being a people's champion. But it's time to think about your future. Our future." Sophia laughed, the sound hollow even to her own ears. "My future? You mean the one where I become Mrs. Franklin Dubois, perfect society wife, hosting dinner parties and producing heirs while you run the merged firm?" "That future? It's a good future," he insisted, moving closer. "A respectable future. Better than pining away for some military man who clearly isn't coming back." The blood drained from Sophia's face. "What did you say?" Franklin's smile turned cruel. "You think people haven't noticed? The pro bono cases for veterans' families? The way you wear dog tags under your blouses? The mysterious absences when that JAG Corps captain was around? Get out." Sophia's voice shook with fury. "Get out of my office." "He's gone, Sophia, probably dead in some classified operation, or maybe he just found someone else, someone more suitable." Franklin reached for her hand. "I can help you save face. We'll announce our engagement at the Christmas gala, have a spring wedding." Sophia jerked away from his touch. "If you don't leave my office right now, I'll have security escort you out." "Your father won't like that." "My father doesn't control my life." Sophia pressed the intercom. "Claire, please call security." Franklin straightened his tie, his mask of civility slipping back into place. "You're making a mistake, Sophia. One you'll regret." After he left, Sophia sat in her darkening office, Jeremy's compass clutched in her trembling hands. The needle pointed steadily south, as it had for 18 months. But for the first time, doubt crept into her heart. She pulled out her phone, opening the encrypted messaging app they'd used for their rare communications. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as tears blurred her vision. "I can't do this anymore," she typed. 18 months of silence, 18 months of lying to everyone I know, 18 months of fighting off Franklin's advances while trying to protect your mission's secrecy. If you can't choose me now, if you can't at least tell me you're alive, then maybe we need to reconsider everything. Her finger trembled over the send button. This wasn't how she'd imagined their love story ending, in a dark office with rain streaming down the windows and doubt corroding her faith. The compass seemed to grow heavier in her hand. She remembered their wedding day, the way Jeremy had looked at her in the small chapel, the promises they'd made. She thought of Agnes's words, "Love wins, child. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but in the end, love always wins." But today, love felt like a weight dragging her under. The society whispers had grown louder, the pressure more intense. Franklin's words echoed in her mind. Probably dead, or found someone else. "I love you," she added to the message, tears falling freely now. "God, I love you so much it hurts. But I can't live in this limbo anymore. Please, Jeremy, please just tell me if you're alive. Tell me if what we have is still real." The send button glowed mockingly on her screen. One tap, and she could shatter everything they'd built, everything they'd sacrificed for. Or one tap could finally break through the silence, force a response, bring her husband back to her. Outside her office, the law firm hummed with late afternoon activity. She could hear her father's voice down the hall, probably discussing the Dubois merger again. Claire's gentle knock reminded her of pending deadlines, waiting clients, a world that continued spinning while her private one threatened to implode. Sophia looked at the compass one last time, remembering Jeremy's words. "The magnetic needle might not point to me, but the heart always knows the way home." With a deep breath that felt like shattered glass in her lungs, she pressed send. The message status changed to delivered, then almost immediately to read. Sophia stared at the screen, her heart pounding. For the first time in their relationship, she'd issued an ultimatum. For the first time, she'd put her own needs above the mission, above duty, above country. Minutes ticked by. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows like artillery fire. She imagined Jeremy somewhere in Australia, reading her words, perhaps in the middle of something critical, something classified, something that could get him killed if he lost focus. Guilt warred with desperation in her heart. She opened her journal, its pages worn from 18 months of one-sided conversations. "My dearest Jeremy, I broke today. The weight of silence finally became too heavy to bear. Franklin knows about us, or suspects at least. The whispers are getting louder, the pressure more intense. I told myself I could be strong enough, patient enough, faithful enough. But today I'm just tired. Did you know that when you left, Agnes gave me a card with a quote on it? Distance means so little when someone means so much. I've held on to those words like a lifeline, but today they feel like chains. I sent you a message I can't take back, words that might destroy everything we've built. But I had to know, have to know, if you're still out there, still fighting, still loving me across all these miles. The compass points south, steady as ever, but my heart is lost in the silence. Please forgive me if I've ruined everything. Please understand that this ultimatum comes from love, not doubt. Please just let me know you're alive, forever yours, even if you can't be mine. Sophia." The office had gone quiet. Most of the staff headed home for the weekend. Sophia sat in the growing darkness, watching her phone, waiting for a response that didn't come. Finally, as midnight approached, she gathered her things to leave. The compass went into her pocket, its weight familiar and comforting despite everything. The roses Franklin had brought lay wilted in her wastepaper basket. Their perfume turned sickly in the enclosed space. As she stepped out into the rain-washed streets of Charleston, Sophia felt something shift inside her. Whether it was her heart breaking or her spirit strengthening, she couldn't tell. But she knew with bone-deep certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The rain soaked through her suit as she walked home, but she barely noticed. In her pocket, the compass needle swung steadily south, pointing toward Australia and a man who held her heart in his silence-bound hands. In her other pocket, her phone remained stubbornly quiet, the message she'd sent hanging in digital space like a sword over everything they'd built together. Sometimes, she thought, the greatest act of love is knowing when to let go. But as she climbed the stairs to their empty apartment, she wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Chapter 7. Operation Heartbreak. Jeremy stared at his phone from his classified location in the Australian outback, the glow of the screen illuminating his weathered face in the darkness of the observation post. Sophia's message burned into his retinas, each word a dagger to his heart. "I can't do this anymore." The red dirt of the outback had worked its way into every crease of his combat uniform, the heat of the day still radiating from the earth despite the night's chill. His team was scattered across 2 kilometers, maintaining surveillance on a suspected weapons cache. 18 months of tracking, infiltrating, and gathering intelligence had led them to this moment. "Captain," his communications specialist Torres whispered from nearby. "Satellite feed shows movement at the target location." Jeremy's thumb hovered over his phone's keyboard. He'd drafted and deleted 100 responses in the past hour, each one feeling inadequate, each one potentially compromising their operation. Their target, an international weapons cartel with terrorist connections, had proven frustratingly adept at intercepting digital communications. "Show me," he murmured, reluctantly pocketing the phone. The surveillance feed showed thermal images of vehicles approaching the compound they'd been watching. This could be it, the major weapons transfer they'd been waiting for. But Sophia's words echoed in his mind. 18 months of silence, 18 months of lying to everyone I know. He hadn't meant for the silence to last this long. The mission had grown more complex with each passing month, the cartel's network proving more extensive than anyone had anticipated. What was supposed to be a 2-year operation now threatened to extend indefinitely. "All units, maintain positions," he whispered into his comm unit. "Radio silence from here on." The Australian night stretched vast and empty around them, the Southern Cross blazing overhead. Jeremy remembered teaching Sophia about the constellation during their brief marriage, promising her he'd look for it every night. He'd kept that promise, finding comfort in knowing she might be looking at the same stars back in Charleston. His hand crept to the chain around his neck, where his wedding ring hung beside his dog tags. The metal was warm from his skin, worn smooth from 18 months of constant wear. Below it, carefully folded and sealed in waterproof material, lay the only photograph he'd dared to bring. Sophia in her simple wedding dress, pearls gleaming at her throat, love shining in her eyes. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the north," Torres reported. "Heavy transport trucks, consistent with weapons shipments." Jeremy forced himself to focus on the mission. Lives depended on their success here. The cartel they were tracking had been responsible for arming terrorist cells across Southeast Asia. Their operation had already prevented 3 major attacks. But Sophia's final words haunted him. "Tell me if what we have is still real." How could she doubt that? Every sunrise, every sunset, every breath between had been for her. The mission's importance had kept him going, yes, but thoughts of returning to her had kept him alive through firefights and close calls. "Sir," Torres's voice held an edge of concern, "we need to move now if we're going to intercept. Jeremy squared his shoulders, pushing his personal pain aside. Alpha Team, move to position Bravo. Beta Team, maintain overwatch. Charlie Team, prepare for interdiction. The next hours passed in a blur of tactical movements and controlled chaos. The weapons shipment was larger than they'd anticipated, enough firepower to supply a small army. As his teams moved into position, Jeremy thought of Sophia's strength in maintaining their secret, protecting his mission, even as it tore her apart. Dawn was breaking over the outback when the operation finally came to its explosive conclusion. The cartel's security forces put up heavy resistance, but Jeremy's teams had trained for this. In the end, they secured the weapons, captured key leaders, and suffered only minor injuries. As the Australian Federal Police moved in to process the scene, Jeremy finally had a moment to breathe. He pulled out his phone, reading Sophia's message again. The sun rising over the red earth reminded him of their last morning together, of her tears as he'd walked away. Captain Whipple, Colonel Henderson's voice crackled through his satellite phone. Report. Jeremy delivered his briefing mechanically, outlining the operation's success. But when he finished, he didn't end the call. Sir, his voice cracked slightly. I need to ask about the communications blackout. There was a long pause. Your wife reached out to you. It wasn't a question. Of course, the colonel knew. He was the only one authorized to monitor their emergency channel. Yes, sir, she's struggling. The silence is breaking her. Breaking you too, from the sound of it. The colonel's voice softened. The operation was successful, Captain. But there are still loose ends to tie up, testimonies to secure, networks to unravel. Jeremy closed his eyes, grief warring with duty. How much longer, sir? That depends on how the interrogations go. Could be weeks, could be months. The rising sun painted the outback in shades of gold, reminding Jeremy of Sophia's skin in the morning light. He thought of her fighting her own battles in Charleston, facing down society's judgment and her father's pressure alone. Sir, he said carefully, requesting permission to send a secured message, just to let her know I'm alive, that it's still real. The silence stretched so long that Jeremy thought the connection had dropped. Finally, the colonel spoke. You know the risks, Captain. One intercepted message could compromise everything we've built here. Put lives in danger. Is that a risk you're willing to take? Jeremy looked at the photograph of Sophia, then at the weapons they'd just seized. How many lives had they saved today? How many more could they save if they completely dismantled the cartel's network? The message she sent, he said slowly. It was about reconsidering everything, about whether what we have is still real. His voice caught. Sir, I'm losing her. Son, the colonel's voice was gentle now. Sometimes we have to make impossible choices. That's what we signed up for. Jeremy touched his wedding ring, remembering their vows in the small chapel. Country first, he whispered. Country first, the colonel echoed. I'm sorry, Captain. The blackout stands. The call ended, leaving Jeremy alone with his thoughts as the sun climbed higher. Around him, his team efficiently processed the scene, cataloging weapons and securing prisoners. They'd struck a major blow against international terrorism today. He should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. He pulled out his phone one last time, opening Sophia's message. The words blurred as he read them again. I love you so much it hurts. His fingers moved over the keyboard, composing the response he couldn't send. My beloved Sophia, every sunrise reminds me of your smile. Every star in the Southern Cross holds a memory of you. Every moment of silence has been torture, knowing you're facing our world alone. The mission grew beyond anything we anticipated. The stakes are higher than I can tell you. Lives hang in the balance of our success here. But none of that matters when I read your words. When I imagine your pain, your doubt, your loneliness, I've asked too much of you, demanded too great a sacrifice. The love we have is real, more real than any mission, any duty, any call to serve. You are my true north, my home, my heart's compass. I'm alive, I'm faithful, I'm fighting every day to come back to you. Please hold on, please keep believing, please don't let go. Forever yours, Jeremy. His thumb hovered over the send button. One press could ease Sophia's pain, restore her faith, save their marriage. One press could also compromise 18 months of work, put lives at risk, undo everything they'd sacrificed for. With a grief that felt like physical pain, Jeremy deleted the draft. He tucked the phone away and stood, brushing red dust from his uniform. Country first, he reminded himself. But for the first time in his military career, the words tasted like ashes in his mouth. The Australian sun climbed higher, promising another scorching day in the outback. Jeremy squared his shoulders and moved to oversee the operation's cleanup, carrying the weight of his silence like a cross. In his chest, his heart beat out a steady rhythm. Sophia, Sophia, Sophia. But duty and honor held his tongue, forcing him to be the soldier instead of the husband, the captain instead of the lover. Only the Southern Cross would witness his tears that night, as he prayed his wife's love would be strong enough to survive his silence. Chapter 8. The Decision. Sir, requesting emergency leave. Jeremy stood before Colonel Henderson in the makeshift command center, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart. The Australian heat pressed against the temporary structure's walls, but inside, the air conditioning hummed steadily, creating an artificial calm. The colonel looked up from the intelligence reports spread across his desk, his weathered face revealing nothing. 18 months of working closely together had taught Jeremy to read the subtle signs of his commander's mood. The slight tightening around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed once on the manila folder before him. Emergency leave? The colonel's voice was carefully neutral. Our operation is at a critical juncture, Captain. The interrogations are yielding valuable intelligence. Jeremy's hands tightened behind his back, parade rest becoming a stance of survival rather than protocol. My marriage won't survive another month of silence, sir. The words hung in the climate-controlled air, heavy with implications. Both men knew the stakes, not just personal, but operational. The weapons cartel they'd been tracking had tentacles reaching into every major conflict zone in Southeast Asia. The intelligence they were gathering could prevent countless deaths. Colonel Henderson opened another file, studying the surveillance photos from their recent raid. Tell me something, Captain. When you married Ms. Reynolds, against regulations I might add, what did you promise her? Jeremy's throat tightened. To love her, sir. To be faithful. To support her dreams. And what did you promise your country when you took your commission? The question hit like a physical blow. To protect and defend, sir. To put duty first. Country first, the colonel echoed softly, almost kindly. It's not just a saying, son. It's a sacred trust. Lives depend on the choices we make. Jeremy moved to the map-covered wall, studying the red pins that marked confirmed weapons caches. With all due respect, sir, my wife's life depends on the choice I make now. The colonel's chair creaked as he leaned back. Explain. She sent me a message, sir, about reconsidering everything. Jeremy's voice cracked slightly. She's alone in Charleston fighting battles I can't even imagine. Society pressure, her father's expectations, God knows what else. And I'm here maintaining radio silence while our marriage crumbles. The mission will fail anyway if I lose my focus, Jeremy interrupted, turning to face his commander. And I'm losing focus, sir. Every minute I spend wondering if my wife is giving up on us is a minute I'm not fully committed to the operation. A distracted soldier is a liability. Colonel Henderson studied him for a long moment. The command center hummed with activity outside his office. Intelligence analysts processing data, communications specialists monitoring frequencies, the constant flow of information that marked modern warfare. You've served with distinction, Captain. the colonel said finally. "Led your teams with courage and skill. The intel we've gathered, the weapons we've intercepted, you've saved countless lives." "Thank you, sir, but..." The colonel held up a hand. "I'm not finished. You've also maintained operational security under extreme personal stress, kept your marriage secret to protect the mission, asked your wife to do the same. That kind of sacrifice, it doesn't go unnoticed." He stood, moving to study the same map Jeremy had been examining. "The operation ends in 3 days." Jeremy's heart skipped a beat. "Sir, the major players are in custody. The weapons caches are secured. The intelligence gathered from the interrogations has been processed." The colonel traced a line on the map. "There will be cleanup, of course. Loose ends to tie up. But the critical phase is complete." Hope, dangerous and bright, bloomed in Jeremy's chest. 3 days, sir." Colonel Henderson turned, his expression softening slightly. "Make it count, Captain. Your team has earned their rotation home. Once the handover to Australian forces is complete, you're cleared for departure." Jeremy felt dizzy with relief. "Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet." The colonel's voice hardened. "These next 3 days are crucial. I need you focused, sharp, committed. Can you give me that?" "Absolutely, sir." "And Captain..." The colonel's eyes held a warning. "No communication with your wife until your wheel's up. We can't risk compromising the handover." Jeremy nodded, understanding the implicit order. 3 more days of silence, 3 more days of letting Sophia think he might be dead or unfaithful, 3 more days of torture for both of them. But then, he returned to his quarters, mind already racing with plans. The small room held few personal belongings. Everything that mattered was either on his body or carefully hidden away. He pulled out the worn photograph of Sophia, studying her radiant smile on their wedding day. 3 days, he whispered to her image. "Hold on for 3 more days, my love." The next 72 hours passed in a blur of activity. Jeremy threw himself into the operation with renewed focus, knowing that each completed task brought him closer to home. His team, sensing his urgency, worked with exceptional efficiency. Intelligence files were processed and transferred. Weapons caches were documented and secured. Prisoners were transported to permanent facilities. Each checkpoint ticked off brought Charleston closer. On the final evening, Colonel Henderson called him in one last time. "The papers are signed," the colonel said without preamble. "Australian forces take command at 0600 tomorrow. Your team's transport leaves at 0800. Jeremy stood at attention, barely daring to breathe. "Yes, sir." "One more thing." The colonel opened his desk drawer, removing a thick envelope. "Your wife's security clearance came through last month, retroactive to the beginning of the operation." Jeremy blinked. "Sir." "Turns out she's been doing some remarkable work with veterans' families. Caught the attention of some people in high places." A ghost of a smile crossed the colonel's face. "Once she's briefed, you'll be able to tell her everything. No more secrets." The implications hit Jeremy like a wave. No more hiding, no more lies, no more watching Sophia struggle alone with a burden she couldn't share. "Thank you, sir, for everything." Colonel Henderson waved him away. "Go pack, Captain. Go home to your wife. Make it right." That night, Jeremy lay on his narrow bunk, watching the Southern Cross through his window. The same stars that had witnessed his silent tears would now guide him home. In less than 24 hours, he would be on a plane to Charleston. He touched his wedding ring, still hanging beside his dog tags. Soon it would return to his finger where it belonged. Soon he would hold Sophia in his arms again, explain everything, beg her forgiveness for the silence that had nearly broken them. His phone lay on the bedside table, Sophia's last message still unanswered. The temptation to respond was almost overwhelming, but he held firm. Better to explain in person, to see her face, to hold her while he told her about the mission that had kept them apart. As dawn broke over the Australian outback one last time, Jeremy packed away 18 months of sacrifice and silence. His rifle was cleaned and stored, his uniforms pressed, his mission reports filed. All that remained was the journey home. The transport plane's engines roared to life at precisely 800 hours. As they lifted off Australian soil, Jeremy touched the compass he'd carried through every mission, the mate to the one he'd given Sophia. Its needle swung steadily north now, pointing toward Charleston, toward home, toward love. "I'm coming home," he whispered to the clouds below. "Hold on, my love. I'm finally coming home." Chapter 9. The Return. The Charleston streets hadn't changed, but Jeremy had. The familiar cobblestones echoed under his boots as he made his way through the historic district, the weight of his duffel bag nothing compared to the weight in his heart. The autumn evening wrapped the city in a gentle mist, softening the edges of the antebellum buildings and gas lamps that lined the streets. His key still worked in the lock of their small house, the home they'd shared for just 4 days before his deployment. The brass was tarnished now, but it turned smoothly, admitting him to a space that felt both achingly familiar and strangely new. The scent hit him first. Lavender and coffee, Sophia's signature combination. She'd kept their home alive in his absence, maintained it as a sanctuary against the world's judgment. His throat tightened as he noticed the small changes. New curtains in the living room, a different arrangement of photographs on the wall, signs of a life that had continued without him. Their wedding photo still held pride of place on the mantel, though. Jeremy touched the frame gently, remembering the hope and love that had filled that small base chapel. 18 months of silence stretched between that day and this one. 18 months of duty and sacrifice and pain. The bedroom light glowed softly through the crack in the door upstairs. His heart thundered in his chest as he climbed the stairs, each step bringing him closer to the moment he'd dreamed of for so long. The wood creaked under his weight, a familiar sound that triggered memories of quieter times, of midnight conversations and gentle laughter. He paused outside the bedroom door, sudden fear gripping his heart. What if Franklin Dubois had been right? What if his silence had finally broken something irreparable between them? What if Sophia's last message, "I can't do this anymore," had been more final than he'd let himself believe? The sound of papers rustling drifted through the gap, accompanied by the soft click of laptop keys. Sophia was working late again, just as Maria had reported during their brief conversation at the base. The colonel's wife had kept an eye on Sophia throughout his deployment, passing along what information she could without compromising operational security. "She's stronger than anyone gives her credit for," Maria had told him. "But everyone has a breaking point, Jeremy. Even the strongest hearts can crack under enough pressure." He touched his wedding ring, now back on his finger where it belonged. The metal was warm against his skin, a constant reminder of promises made and kept through impossible circumstances. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The scene before him stole his breath more effectively than any combat maneuver ever had. Sophia lay on their bed, surrounded by case files and legal briefs, her laptop casting a blue glow over her features. She wore his old army t-shirt, the one he'd left behind by accident in his hurried departure. Her grandmother's pearls still gleamed at her throat, and beside her laptop sat his compass, its needle pointing steadfastly south toward the place he'd just left. But it was her computer screen that made his heart stop. Classified mission reports filled the display, operation details, surveillance photos, intelligence briefs. Everything he hadn't been able to tell her, everything he'd carried alone for 18 months, was laid out before her in official military documentation. "You knew?" The words escaped him before he could stop them, his voice cracking with emotion. "All this time." Sophia didn't startle at his voice. Instead, She looked up slowly, tears already streaming down her cheeks. The sight of her crying shattered something inside him, all his carefully prepared explanations, all his rehearsed apologies crumbling to dust. "I couldn't tell you," she whispered, her voice hoarse as if she'd been crying for hours, days, months. "Operational security. I protected you the only way I could, by staying away." Jeremy moved into the room on unsteady legs, his duffel bag slipping forgotten to the floor. "How?" Sophia sat up, papers sliding to the floor unheeded. 3 months after you left, I was appointed as civilian counsel to a joint task force. International weapons trafficking, terrorist financing, cross-border jurisdiction issues. Her laugh held no humor. "Imagine my surprise when I opened the first briefing file and saw your mission designation. You had clearance all this time?" The bed dipped under his weight as he sat beside her, close enough to touch, but maintaining a small distance, uncertain of his welcome after so much silence. "Top secret clearance, need to know basis." Her hands twisted in her lap. "I read every report, tracked every operation. I knew when you were in firefights, when you made major breakthroughs, when you had close calls." Her voice broke. "I knew everything, except whether you still loved me." The distance between them became unbearable. Jeremy reached for her, pulling her into his arms with a desperation born of 18 months of separation. She came willingly, melting against him as if they'd never been apart. "Every sunrise," he murmured into her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "Every sunset, every moment in between." "I never stopped loving you, never stopped fighting to come home to you." Sophia's tears soaked through his shirt as she clung to him. "I had to maintain the facade, had to pretend I didn't know where you were, what you were doing, had to let people think." She shuddered. "Franklin kept pushing, kept trying to convince me you'd abandoned me. And I couldn't tell him, couldn't tell anyone that I was reading your mission reports every night, praying each one wouldn't be the last." Jeremy pulled back enough to cup her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You carried this alone. All this time, you carried this burden alone." "Not alone," she corrected softly. "Maria knew I had clearance. She helped me maintain my cover, gave me someone to talk to when the weight became too much." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Agnes suspected something too, I think. She always seemed to know when I'd read a particularly difficult report. Those were the days she added extra shots to my lattes. The message you sent," Jeremy's voice roughened, "about reconsidering everything, was real," Sophia admitted. "The silence was killing me, even knowing why it was necessary. Watching you risk your life through the lens of classified reports, unable to reach out, unable to tell you I knew." She touched his face, tracing the new lines that stress and sun had carved around his eyes. "I needed to know if the man would ever come before the mission, if there was still room in your heart for more than duty." Jeremy pressed his forehead to hers, their breath mingling in the quiet room. "Country first," he whispered. "That's what they taught us, what they drilled into us. But loving you..." His voice caught. "Loving you taught me that sometimes the heart knows better than any military doctrine." "Is it over?" Sophia asked softly. "The mission?" "Yes." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, relearning the taste of her lips. "The operation was successful. The cartel is dismantled, the weapons secured, the intelligence processed." His hands tightened on her waist. "I'm home, Sophia, really home." She pulled back slightly, studying his face in the soft lamplight. "For how long?" "For good." At her startled look, he explained, "I'm transferring to the JAG Corps. Colonel Henderson arranged it. No more classified operations, no more months of silence." He touched the pearls at her throat. "No more hiding what we mean to each other." Sophia's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different. tears of joy, of relief, of love renewed. "I never stopped believing in us," she whispered. "Even when it hurt, even when doubt crept in, the compass always pointed true." Jeremy gathered her closer, shifting them until they lay tangled together on the bed, case files and laptops pushed aside to make room for reunion and reconciliation. Outside, Charleston continued its eternal dance of tradition and progress, unaware that within its historic bounds, a love story had come full circle. "I have something for you," he murmured, reaching for his duffel bag. From a hidden pocket, he withdrew a small box. Inside lay a delicate gold chain, designed to hold her wedding ring when she was ready to wear it publicly. "No more hiding," he promised. "No more secrets. Just us, facing whatever comes together." Sophia touched the chain with trembling fingers, then surprised him by shaking her head. Instead, she pulled her wedding ring from beneath her shirt, where she'd worn it on a simple cord all these months. "No more hiding," she agreed, sliding the ring onto her finger where it belonged. "Let Charleston society talk. Let my father fume. Let Franklin plot his corporate mergers without me." She kissed him, fierce and claiming. "I'm done living in shadows." The bedroom light glowed softly through the night as they relearned each other, healing 18 months of separation with touch and taste and whispered words of love. The compass on the nightstand pointed steadily south, but it didn't matter anymore. Both halves of its pair were finally home. Chapter 10. The Revelation. Sophia lay on their bed, surrounded by case files, her laptop showing his classified mission details. She'd been assigned as legal counsel to the International Task Force months ago, reading his mission reports, protecting his safety with her silence. The morning light streamed through their bedroom window, painting the room in shades of gold as Jeremy absorbed the full scope of what his wife had done to protect him and his mission. "Show me," he said softly, settling beside her on the bed. "Show me everything." Sophia pulled up the first file, dated just 3 months after his deployment. The Department of Defense letterhead bore her security clearance designation, Top Secret SCI, with special access to Operation Outback Shield. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened document after document. "It started with a phone call from General Mitchell," she explained, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "He'd reviewed my work on the JAG Corps cases, particularly the international jurisdiction precedents I'd established. The task force needed a civilian counsel who understood both military operations and international law." Jeremy studied the briefs she'd written, the legal framework she'd established to allow cross-border operations. Her brilliant legal mind had helped shape the very mission that had kept them apart. "Here," she pulled up another file. "The night you raided the warehouse in Perth. I was in court when the alert came through." Her voice caught. "I had to stand there, arguing a corporate case, knowing you were in a firefight halfway around the world." The mission report detailed the operation. 3 wounded, but no casualties. Jeremy remembered that night, the crack of gunfire, the weight of responsibility for his men. "You knew about every operation." "Everyone." Sophia touched the screen where his signature marked the bottom of the report. "I reviewed the legal implications, advised on jurisdictional issues, helped ensure everything would stand up in international court." She laughed softly, though tears shone in her eyes. "All those pro bono cases for veterans' families, they weren't just about staying connected to your world. They were my cover for the classified work I was doing." Jeremy's throat tightened as he realized the true depth of her sacrifice. The society pressure, Franklin's pursuit, your father's disappointment, you faced all that while carrying this secret. "Maria helped," Sophia admitted, pulling up another file. "She was my official liaison to the task force. When the reports were too difficult to bear alone, she'd come over, We'd drink wine and she'd remind me that loving a soldier means being strong enough to carry both our burdens. The next document made Jeremy's breath catch, surveillance photos from the final operation, the one that had led to his return. Sophia's legal analysis was attached, her precise language laying out the framework for international prosecution. "I knew you were coming home," she whispered. The mission parameters were complete, the legal groundwork laid for prosecution, but I couldn't tell you I knew, couldn't risk compromising everything we'd worked for. "That's why you sent the message," Jeremy realized. "You knew the operation was ending." Sophia nodded, tears spilling over. "I needed you to choose me. Not because the mission was over, not because duty allowed it, but because love demanded it. I needed to know that the man I married still existed beneath all the classified operations and military protocol." Jeremy gathered her into his arms, documents and laptop shifting aside. "The man you married never left," he murmured into her hair. "He just got buried under the weight of silence and duty. But every report I filed, every operation I led, they all ended with thoughts of coming home to you." Sophia pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "There's more," she said softly. "The night Franklin confronted me in my office, I'd just finished reviewing the intelligence on the weapons shipment. I knew you were preparing for the final raid. His threats, his proposal, they came when I was at my most vulnerable. Knowing you were about to risk everything but unable to explain why, I still believed in us." "I'm sorry," Jeremy's voice cracked. "Sorry you had to carry this alone." "Not alone," Sophia corrected, touching his face. "Every time I read your reports, saw your signature, traced your movements across the map, I was with you. Maybe not physically, but in every way that mattered." She reached for another file, this one bearing the highest security classifications. "This was my real work," she explained, "creating the legal framework for prosecuting international arms dealers across jurisdictions. The precedents we established will help dismantle other cartels, save countless lives." Jeremy read through her brilliant legal arguments, her careful construction of international cooperation agreements. "You weren't just protecting my mission," he realized. "You were making sure it meant something lasting." "Of course I was." Sophia's smile was tender. "You taught me that, remember? That real change requires more than just winning the immediate battle. It requires building foundations for lasting victory." The morning sun climbed higher, casting rainbow patterns through the crystal paperweight on her desk. Jeremy picked it up, remembering how he'd given it to her when she made junior partner. "All those society events," he said slowly, "the pressure to marry Franklin, merge the firms, were nothing compared to the importance of what we were doing." Sophia's voice held steel beneath its softness. "Every time someone questioned my choices, tried to push me toward their version of acceptable, I'd come home and read your reports. Remind myself that while they worried about social status, you were risking your life to make the world safer." She pulled up one final document, her security clearance renewal, dated for another 5 years. "I'm not stopping," she said quietly. "The task force has asked me to continue as their civilian counsel. Different operations, different teams, but the same mission, using international law to fight those who profit from violence." Jeremy stared at her in wonder. The woman he'd married had been brilliant, passionate, dedicated. The woman who'd waited for him, protected him, supported his mission while fighting her own battles. She was magnificent. "I love you," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of 18 months of silence. "Not just for waiting, not just for understanding, but for becoming even more extraordinary while I was gone." Sophia's answering smile was radiant. "And I love you," she whispered. "Not just the soldier who serves his country, but the man who taught me that real strength lies in fighting for what matters, no matter the cost." Outside their window, Charleston was waking up, unaware that within its historic bounds, a love story had transcended duty, distance, and silence to emerge stronger than ever. The classified documents on Sophia's laptop told a tale of international intrigue and legal precedent, but the real story was written in the eyes of two people who had chosen love over convention, truth over comfort, and each other over everything else. The compass on the nightstand pointed steadily south, but its mission was complete. Both halves of its pair had found their true north in each other's hearts. Chapter 11. The Reunion. "You knew?" Jeremy's voice cracked, raw emotion bleeding through his carefully maintained military composure. "All this time." Sophia smiled through her tears, reaching for him across the scattered case files that covered their bed. "I couldn't tell you. Operational security. I protected you the only way I could, by staying away." The morning sunlight streamed through their bedroom window, painting them both in shades of gold as they began to bridge the 18-month gap that had stretched between them. Outside, Charleston was waking up, unaware that within its historic bounds, a love story was writing its next chapter. "We need to tell them," Sophia said softly, her hand finding Jeremy's. "Our families. They deserve to know everything now." Jeremy tensed slightly, his fingers tightening around hers. "Your father needs to understand what real courage looks like," she finished firmly. "What real love can accomplish." They dressed carefully, Sophia in a tailored navy suit that spoke of professional confidence, Jeremy in his dress blues with every medal and commendation in place. His transfer to the JAG Corps wouldn't be official for another week, but today he needed the full weight of his service record visible. Maria Henderson had arranged everything, using her social connections to ensure both families would be present at the Reynolds mansion for Sunday brunch. It was a tradition Sophia had maintained even through the long months of separation, though she'd stopped trying to deflect her father's attempts to seat her next to Franklin Dubois. The drive through Charleston's historic streets was quiet, both of them lost in thought. Sophia's wedding ring caught the morning light, no longer hidden on a chain, but proudly displayed on her finger. Jeremy's matching band felt right, solid, a physical reminder that the silence was finally over. Judge Reynolds himself opened the door, his distinguished face showing surprise at seeing Jeremy in full uniform. "Captain Whipple," he said stiffly, "this is unexpected." "Hello, Daddy." Sophia stepped forward, her hand firmly clasped in Jeremy's. "We need to talk, all of us." The study where she'd once stood alone, defending her heart's choice, now felt smaller with both families crowded inside. Admiral Whipple's wheelchair commanded one corner, his military bearing unchanged by age or injury. Judge Reynolds stood behind his desk, while Franklin Dubois, invited by Sophia's father in yet another matchmaking attempt, lounged against the bookshelf with poorly concealed hostility. "What is the meaning of this?" Judge Reynolds demanded as Maria Henderson closed the study door, taking up position beside her husband. "Sophia, if this is some kind of protest against the Dubois merger, this isn't about mergers or law firms," Sophia interrupted, her voice steady. "This is about truth, about duty, about love." She moved to the desk, removing a thick folder from her briefcase. 18 months ago, I was appointed as civilian counsel to a classified military task force. Top secret clearance, special access to Operation Outback Shield. She met her father's startled gaze, the same operation that sent Captain Whipple to Australia. The room fell silent as she laid out document after document, security clearances and mission reports carefully redacted, but still bearing the unmistakable seals of high-level military operations. "Those pro bono cases," her father said slowly, recognition dawning. "The veterans' families were my cover," Sophia confirmed, "a way to explain my involvement with military legal matters without compromising operational security." Franklin pushed away from the bookshelf, his face darkening. You expect us to believe this convenient story, that you've been some kind of secret government lawyer while pining away for Captain Whipple's mission, Colonel Henderson cut in smoothly, dismantled one of the largest weapons cartels in Southeast Asia, prevented multiple terrorist attacks, saved countless lives. His voice hardened, and Ms. Reynolds's legal framework made it possible to prosecute the perpetrators across international jurisdictions. Admiral Whipple wheeled forward slightly, his keen eyes moving between Jeremy and Sophia. You knew? He asked his son. That she was involved? No, sir. Jeremy's voice was steady. I maintained radio silence for 18 months, believing she was in the dark about my mission. She carried that burden alone, protecting both me and the operation. Judge Reynolds sank into his chair, the weight of realization aging him visibly. All this time, he murmured. All those dinners where I pushed you toward Franklin, questioned your choices. I couldn't tell you, Daddy, Sophia's voice softened, just like Jeremy couldn't tell me. We both served in the ways we were called to serve. But why maintain the secrecy? Franklin demanded. Why let everyone think? Because that's what duty required, Jeremy interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of command. Because sometimes protecting what matters means letting others think the worst of you. He moved to stand beside Sophia, their united front a stark contrast to the divided families before them. Sir, he addressed Judge Reynolds directly, 18 months ago, I married your daughter in secret, not because our love wasn't real, but because it was too important to risk compromising the mission. You're married? Franklin's incredulous laugh held no humor. This is absurd. Judge Reynolds, surely you can't... Be quiet, Franklin. The judge's voice cracked like a gavel. He stood, moving around his desk to study his daughter more closely. You've changed, he said softly. All these months, I thought it was heartbreak, making you stronger. But it was purpose, wasn't it? Mission. Sophia smiled through tears. Country first, she whispered. Isn't that what you always taught me? To serve something greater than ourselves? The Admiral cleared his throat. The legal precedents established during Operation Outback Shield, he said carefully. They'll change how we fight international arms trafficking, save lives for years to come. He looked at Sophia with new respect. That was your work. Some of it, she acknowledged. The task force wants me to continue as their civilian counsel. Different operations, but the same mission, using international law to fight those who profit from violence. Colonel Henderson stepped forward. Captain Whipple's transfer to the JAG Corps becomes official next week. He'll be working alongside his wife, combining military experience with legal expertise to continue serving their country. Franklin pushed away from the wall. This is ridiculous. Judge Reynolds, the merger agreements mean nothing, the judge cut him off, compared to what these two have accomplished. He moved to stand before Jeremy and Sophia, his expression softening. I was wrong, he said simply, about both of you, about everything. The admission hung in the air, weighted with 18 months of judgment and misunderstanding. Admiral Whipple wheeled closer, his military bearing softening slightly. Sometimes, he said gruffly, duty means more than following orders. Sometimes it means following your heart and trusting it will lead you to serve in ways you never imagined. Sophia knelt beside his wheelchair, taking his weathered hand in hers. Does this mean you'll both come to our second wedding? A proper ceremony this time, with all our family present? The two patriarchs exchanged glances. Years of prejudice and tradition crumbling in the face of love proved stronger than silence. Duty proved compatible with devotion. I would be honored, the Admiral said firmly. Judge Reynolds cleared his throat. As would I. He looked pointedly at Franklin. I believe Mr. Dubois was just leaving. The merger discussions are terminated. Franklin stormed out, but no one noticed his departure. The study that had once witnessed battle lines being drawn now saw them erased, replaced by new understanding and newfound respect. Maria Henderson slipped out quietly, returning moments later with Agnes from the coffee shop. The elderly woman carried a tray of her famous lavender lattes, her knowing smile suggesting she'd been in on the plan all along. "Love wins," she said simply, passing out the cups. "It just sometimes takes a while for everyone else to catch up." As the morning sun filled the study with golden light, two families began the process of becoming one. The compass in Jeremy's pocket pointed steadily toward his wife, its mission complete now that love had found its true course. Chapter 12. Love Transcendent. Their families arrived the next morning, summoned by the news of Jeremy's return. They found the couple in the kitchen making breakfast together, their love having weathered every storm, defied every expectation, and emerged stronger. Judge Reynolds looked at his daughter's happiness and finally understood. Love knows no boundaries, no rules, no limitations. It simply is. The morning light streamed through the windows of River's Edge coffee shop, where it had all begun. Agnes had closed the shop for the morning, transforming it into an intimate space for a very special ceremony. White roses and jasmine garlands draped the vintage furniture, their fragrance mingling with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Sophia stood before the small mirror in Agnes's office, her grandmother's pearls gleaming at her throat. The white dress she wore today was more elaborate than her first wedding dress, but still elegant in its simplicity. Maria Henderson helped adjust her veil, while Agnes dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "You know," Agnes said softly, "when you two first sat at that corner table, I told Maria that I'd never seen two souls more perfectly matched. Even with all the obstacles, all the judgment, your hearts knew the truth." In the main room, Jeremy stood in his dress blues, his father's wheelchair positioned proudly beside him. The Admiral had insisted on standing for the ceremony, his military bearing as straight and proud as ever, despite his injury. Colonel Henderson stood as best man, while the small gathering of guests, family, close friends, and some of the veterans' families Sophia had helped, filled the coffee shop with warmth and love. Judge Reynolds appeared in the office doorway, his eyes misting as he saw his daughter. "You were right," he said quietly, "about everything. About love being stronger than tradition, about courage taking many forms." He offered his arm. "Ready to marry your soldier?" "Again?" Sophia's laugh was pure joy. "I've been ready for 18 months, Daddy." The ceremony was everything their first wedding couldn't be: public, celebrated, surrounded by family and friends who finally understood the depth of their love and sacrifice. The chaplain who had married them the first time stood before them again, his words carrying new meaning. "Love," he began, "is not just a feeling. It's a choice we make every day, a choice to believe, to trust, to serve something greater than ourselves. These two have proven that love can transcend silence, distance, and duty. They've shown us that true partnership means supporting each other's missions even when the cost seems too high." Jeremy's voice was steady as he repeated his vows, though his eyes shone with emotion. "I, Jeremy Alexander Whipple, reaffirm my commitment to you, Sophia Charlotte Reynolds. Through classified missions and public service, through silence and reunion, through every challenge that lies ahead, I choose you, I love you, I honor you." Sophia's answering vows rang with conviction. "I, Sophia Charlotte Reynolds, reaffirm my commitment to you, Jeremy Alexander Whipple. Through legal battles and military operations, through secrets kept and truths revealed, through every adventure yet to come, I choose you, I love you, I honor you." As they exchanged rings again, This time, in full view of their world, Agnes stepped forward with 2 lattes, topped with her signature lavender foam. "A toast," she announced, "to love that begins in coffee shops and grows strong enough to change hearts and minds." The reception that followed was a blend of military precision and southern hospitality. The Dubois family was notably absent, but the room was filled with people who mattered. Sophia's legal colleagues who had supported her pro bono work, Jeremy's fellow officers who had served with him, the veterans' families whose lives they had touched. Judge Reynolds surprised everyone by raising his glass. "To my daughter and son-in-law," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "who taught me that true courage isn't about maintaining tradition, it's about daring to love without limits, serve without recognition, and trust without conditions." Admiral Whipple added his own toast, "To love that makes us better soldiers, better lawyers, better people, to partnerships that prove duty and devotion can coexist beautifully." As the celebration continued, Jeremy led Sophia to their corner table, now marked with a small brass plaque commemorating their first meeting. The compass he'd given her lay between them, its needle finally at rest. "No more missions?" she asked softly. "Only our mission," he replied, touching her cheek. "Building a life together, serving our country in our own ways, showing the world that love knows no boundaries." Speaking of service, Sophia's smile held a secret. The task force has a new operation starting next month. International human rights law, military jurisdiction, the works. Her eyes sparkled. "Think you can handle working with your wife, Captain?" Jeremy's laugh was full of joy and promise. "I've spent 18 months working with you from afar, Counselor. Having you by my side will be heaven." As evening fell, the coffee shop glowed with candlelight. Agnes shooed the last guests away, leaving the newlyweds again to share a final dance where their love story began. The vintage record player spun softly in the corner, playing the same song they danced to at their first wedding. "You know," Sophia murmured against Jeremy's chest, "Franklin asked me once why I kept coming to this coffee shop, even when he thought you'd abandoned me. And what did you tell him? That some places hold magic. Some loves transcend understanding." She looked up at her husband, her eyes shining. "Some hearts just know the way home." Jeremy kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Outside, Charleston continued its eternal dance of tradition and progress. Inside River's Edge, witnessed by Agnes's knowing smile and the gentle glow of candlelight, 2 hearts beat as one, proof that love, when true and tested and triumphant, knows no limits at all. The compass on their table pointed steadily forward, toward a future they would face together, where duty and devotion danced in perfect harmony, and love transcended every boundary it faced. The end.